Hello, my name is Raina Heflin, and today I will be presenting a presentation on children in prison, 6 profiles before, during, and after incarceration. This was a story told by Jerome Gold, and this is my presentation on it. To begin, we're going to go ahead and dive into the introduction. So, Children in Prison really looks into the lives of the kids that are caught up within the U.S. criminal justice system. Jerome Gold, fun fact, was actually a jail rehabilitation counselor who wrote the book, which of course gives him that unique personal view on each of these children's lives. The story basically follows 6 teens who live within the Ash Meadow Juvenile Facility in Washington State. Their tales are told, of course, as the story entails. The tales are told before, during, and after they go to jail, showing how each of their lives have changed. The book will go into deeper details on how domestic violence, poverty, and racial injustice, and even damaged families can potentially lead to crime, and has shown that it has. But I don't believe that Gould necessarily wants readers to think about just punishing the kids. Instead, he really wants them to think about what they need to recover. This book isn't only about crime, it's also about squandered potential, strength, and the need for juvenile justice reform right now. All right, so for the first few pages 1 through 52, the book starts by the book starts by telling the two stories of David and Maurice, who were abused physically, emotionally as children and had very unstable homes. As we can see, David's mother had stabbed him in the leg with a carving knife, and Maurice's father used to beat him until he passed out. Those were just a few quotes that I snatched up from the book. Gold shows that these boys' criminal behavior comes from the trauma, not necessarily malice. I feel like Gold actually utilizes a lot of these personal experiences, such as David and Maurice's backstory, to really paint that light of the bigger point in the system about how some of the behaviors that they illegally done were really necessarily caused by the trauma, not necessarily just out of malice. um, but the first few chapters just basically indicate how the kids were let down long before they even went to jail. It's not necessarily their fault. Their family and community kind of let them down. Now, here, as the discipline is enforced at Meadow, healing is not necessarily shown to be its top priority, as we can tell. They do have a lot of routine. They're very strict when it comes across to the kids, but I didn't actually see a lot of the healing as Gold actually went on through the book to tell us about. A lot of the staff members don't have the skills or even the desire to help these kids with their mental health issues. So the first section of the book is basically just setting up the main ideas of the story, including the trauma, the institutional failure, and the human cost of the justice system that puts punishment ahead of rehabilitation. Now, in terms of my reaction, I kind of nicknamed the title wrong. This is supposed to be reaction, but I found 3 main themes that I kind of really wanted to go over for each section of the stories that I went over. So the first one that I saw was trauma as a root cause. So Gold showing off David and Maurice's stories kind of made it evident that trauma, not necessarily that trauma and that the children were not necessarily terrible by nature. That trauma is really what caused them to act out, to behave this way, to drive them, as many young people, to act the way they do. Their choices are based on their misery, which shows how vital it is to deal with these core reasons instead of just punishing them. Of course, you can just punish a dog for acting bad, but if you don't prevent such things from happening, then the behavior will continue, such with children. The second one I saw was invisibility of childhood pain. So Gold goes through how easy it is for a child's emotional agony to go unnoticed, just like Maurice's quiet nature. Because of this lack of exposure, trauma often goes untreated and stays concealed, which can make healing very difficult. The last one that I saw was dehumanization within the system. Gold reminds us that these youngsters aren't just criminals, they are victims of people who didn't do their jobs. Their decisions show that they are trying to survive, not that they are evil people, which is a different way at looking at them. Oh, kind of skipped through. All right. And then we have pages 53 to 104. this part, it's still just a continuation of the stories of the 6 profiles of the kids that were in Meadow. Um, we will go through how the readers realize how long-term instability, abuse, and neglect affects how the kids act. Many of them have actually come from different factors of life, such as foster homes, group homes, and even failed interventions before actually being sent to Ash Meadow. Gold says that these young people in particular show the emotional attachment, aggressiveness, and complete withdrawal as the way to protect themselves after years and years of being let down by the caretakers and institution. It's not so much that they are rebelling as it is they are trying to stay alive. And I think that part actually hits very deep because that is very true. Many of these kids, they seem to wall themselves off. They fail to react to people, to build those personal connections, because any regard of that is seen as a weakness or as a threat. These patterns of mistrust and emotional isolation, they're often become very worse by going to these facilities, as Gold says, instead of becoming better. And I think it's very important, as Gold thinks, that these flaws in the juvenile justice system, we can't necessarily just go off of rules and punishment. They can't take the place of care, therapy, or personal connection. Important quote that he even mentioned is, we keep these kids locked up and then expect them to return to the world change, when all we've really done is contain them. All we've really done is lock them up. We didn't really show them anything different. We didn't really help them with their needs. So that's where I get into the main point that I wanted to react to, was the institutional failure to heal. His criticism about these facilities is that they are designed to help, but they actually make things a lot more worse. They don't just take care of the emotional sufferings these youngsters are going through. They just want them to follow their rules. And sometimes it just ends up making the trauma worse instead of better. It really made me wonder if we're trying to fix behavior without even knowing what caused it. It's just kind of like sticking them into a box and saying, this will fix them. They'll learn their lesson. They won't ever want to come back here again. But what does that actually teach them? For pages 105 through 106, we just continue the lives of the young people in prison, showing how that same instability and neglect that got them there often gets them in the way of their recovery. A lot of times when they get out, they go back home to places that aren't necessarily safe or very unfriendly, which makes it very hard for them to see the positive change or even make positive changes in their lives. We also see how the emotional limits of the juvenile court professionals, they also feel very helpless, it seems. Many of them were frustrated, emotionally distant, and with them being emotionally distant and helpless to the kids, it's not necessarily helpful. I did want to go over one other portion, was how Gold talks on how there aren't enough transitional assistance and mental health services for young people who are moving back into the community, which makes these system problems even more clear. He writes, you can't turn a kid loose and expect them to be different if nothing around him has changed. These kids are going back home to the same places that led them here. Same communities that are torn up with poverty, drugs, dysfunctional families, and you're sending them back and thinking that everything will change when you have to fix the root of the problem, as well as their emotional help as well, for them to even see the positive changes. So that's where I get into those 2 points: emotional burnout and detachment in staff, and the ongoing impact of childhood trauma. So with the staff members, they intend well, they really do. But some of them are just so emotionally drained, and I get that a lot. Those kids and what they've gone through, and having to be those people there for those children, and it's not just 1 or 2, it's many of them. It can make someone very burnt out and disconnected, which then could cause, distrust against the young people. They see this type of burnout, they see this type of disconnect, and where someone's just there for work, someone's just there for the pay, and they're not going to reach out and open up to that person. Yeah, it made me see that the staff really needs just as much help as the kids if we really want things to change. They have to be trained professionals. In regards to the childhood trauma, this part also made me understand how deep trauma goes. The teens are still stuck in their history, even if they are starting to understand it, and this is because the system doesn't provide them with therapy at all, guidance, protection, anything that they really need to heal. Gold just makes it obvious that rehabilitation is almost impossible without such items. It made me realize that just identifying trauma isn't enough, and we have to do something about it. I'm sorry if I'm stuttering. I get very nervous. So my review of those slides, oh, no, for the new section for 157 to 196, so almost towards the end. This is towards the end in this chapter. Gold just really kind of kept following through the youth after they got out of jail. So this is the after incarceration point and how they got back into society. And it just really shows that they don't have the support, as he mentioned in the beginning. Their homes are chaotic. They don't have access to mental health or even educational services opportunities. And so what do? They end up breaking the law again or break their parole. And it's not because they necessarily want to, but it's because they don't have any options. And they are always among that same bad influence that got them there in trouble in the first place. Gold thinks about how he feels, and that's angry, guilty, and helpless when he's there, because you're just watching that youth's promising growth fall apart after they leave that facility, because there's nothing else out there to necessarily help them. The story just makes it obvious that real rehabilitation takes more than just changing behavior for a short time. So recidivism as a symptom and not a failure of will. So Gold's view helped me also see that it's not just necessarily about making bad choices. It's also about the kids going back to the same hazardous, unstable places that cause them suffering. Also, the inadequacy of short-term intervention. Short-term remedies, they don't really bring any enduring change. All they do is provide some structure and stability, but it's very limited. It's not very meaningful or long-term at all. All right. And then for the last section, we just get into what happened to the 6 young people after they were released. Many of them relapsed. Some actually made progress, and some are still struggling. The book basically ends by saying again and again that individual strength can't fix structural problems on their own, and many of the young people still live in poverty, in places that aren't safe, and don't have access to counseling or education. He really stresses that real change can only happen when people are willing to face societal issues that could lead people from going to jail in the first place. Yep, so society's accountability, as we mentioned, that message, it touched home. We cannot just blame the kids. Society is what makes these situations that people are put in. We have to put the money into families, schools, neighborhoods, not just the jails. How can we expect kids to do better if we never gave them the tools they needed in the first place? And the limits of institutional care without social reform. Again, the problem isn't just the kids, it's the world that we send them back to. Gold said, and that really stuck with me, it made me understand that no matter how hard a facility tries to help, it's not enough if the world outside is still dysfunctional. If the communities these kids go back to don't really change, all the progress they've achieved can just come apart. So in conclusion, trauma, poverty, abuse, and institutional neglect affects young people who end up in jail. They are not born criminals. Gold shows how highly genuine and compassionate portrayal of kids in the legal system, and that goes against preconceptions and assumptions. Juvenile facilities give structure, but they don't always help these kids and rehabilitate emotionally and mentally. Reintegration is unstable, and without long-term community support, a lot of young people can go back to the places that make it hard for them to succeed. And Gold's main point is that real rehabilitation needs to deal with socio-economic problems that lead to prison and not just the conduct that comes from them. And here are my citations. Thank you again so much for hearing my presentation. Bye-bye.